And now, aviation weather around Alaska. Hello, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska aviation weather outlook on this Wednesday, May 8th. This outlook will be for Thursday and Friday as we close out the work week and looking at what we're going to be dealing with. There's a few different systems. As of this Wednesday, we have a low that's going to be riding up into Prince William Sound and weakening as the front lifts northward. Some of that moisture will spread up into the interior over the Alaska range as we get into Thursday and Friday. But there's going to be another low come up quickly out of the North Pacific and pass between the Yakutat and Cape Suckling, and that's going to bring in a round of even some heavier rain and windier conditions, especially on Thursday for the northeastern Gulf Coast in through the northern central panhandle. There could be some heavier rain there. And then back out to the west, there will be an area of low pressure that works its way eastward across the Aleutians on Thursday into early Friday morning before emerging into the North Pacific and then swinging up into the western Gulf for the weekend, Friday and into the weekend. So in the meantime, we're dealing with, for Thursday morning, we anticipate the one low already coming, energy from that coming onshore, MVFR along the Alaska range, IFR parts of the intercoastal mountains here, northern Gulf Coast, in through the panhandle, especially northern panhandle. Here's the next impulse of precipitation, lower ceilings, gustier winds associated with a front as the low tracks northward rather quickly. Along the Arctic coast Thursday morning, IFR conditions down into the western North Slope, pockets of IFR, northern Seward Peninsula, parts of the lower Yukon Delta back towards St. Lawrence Island, then a broad area of IFR associated with low pressure and the front arcing ahead of it there through the western half of the Aleutians. Thursday afternoon, typically daytime, we get some improvement in ceilings and things, so MVFR possible here throughout areas of the northwest and along the central south slopes of the Brooks Range. But here we have along this frontal boundary and feet of moisture, a band of IFR conditions anticipated Thursday afternoon. And again, some of the precipitation here will be moderate to heavy. You're going to have heavier rain along coastal areas. You get up in the mountains and there'll be some heavy late season snows in this region here. So keep that in mind with the IFR conditions, along with some gustier winds along the frontal boundary. And then as the low works its way eastward across the Aleutians on Thursday, we expect IFR conditions from the lower Bering down across into the central eastern Aleutians. And then Friday morning, we still have IFR conditions, especially intercoastal mountains, southern parts of the Panhandle on up into the northeastern Gulf Coast. That low in energy also beginning to spread northward and dissipating. But again, that's going to provide some moisture for the afternoon that interior areas could see showers or areas of snow and rain mixed pop up there with the daytime heating due to that instability this time of year as we get deeper into spring. Across the Arctic coast, IFR conditions Friday morning, pockets there, northern Seward Peninsula, Kotzebue Sound, down to between the lower Yukon Delta, St. Lawrence Island. And then Friday afternoon, we expect conditions, ceilings typically to lift a bit to improve with MVFR in the far north, as well as areas of the Gulf up into the Copper River Basin. Pockets of IFR, eastern Kodiak Island, on over toward areas, say, Chiknik eastward on over into the southeast Bering. So looking at past conditions for the central eastern Brooks Range, MVFR on Thursday at Anatuvik, as well as Adigan passes. Down along the Alaska Range, we do anticipate generally MVFR conditions through the west arm up through the central Alaska Range for Thursday. Lake Clark and Merrill, generally MVFR. Rainy Pass, MVFR. Windy Pass, also MVFR. As we go east, Isabel should also still be in on some of that MVFR. And then Mentasta Pass may be VFR Thursday morning. It'll be MVFR south of the pass through the day Thursday, and then Mentasta Pass becoming MVFR as we go through the day, and Tanita Pass and south to the Gulf there, Portage Pass, also MVFR conditions are anticipated on Thursday. And then finally, in the far northern end of the Panhandle, IFR conditions are expected in advance of that frontal system and low that'll be lifting northward there in the morning, giving way to MVFR conditions as precipitation ceilings try to lift later in the day. Looking at the freezing levels aloft, in the interior, we do find some areas, middle Yukon, Tanana Valley, where temperatures stay just above freezing at night. Freezing levels aloft do bump upwards with that low that's coming up into this region ahead of it. By Thursday morning, we see freezing levels 6,000 feet, central southern panhandle above 8,000 feet, 10,000 feet there near and south of Haida Gwaii. So there is a surge of warmer air. In fact, temperatures could be quite warm up into the 60s across southern parts of the panhandle, like at Craig, Klawak, and Ketchikan Thursday afternoon. And then to the west, we have that low pressure. And so ahead of that frontal system, we see freezing levels aloft bump upwards 8,000 feet along areas of the central western Aleutians. And then the threat of icing with this precipitation, first of all, we can go over here. You can see moderate icing possible along the Gulf Coast above 4,000 feet. There'll be some heavier snows in this region in the intercoastal mountains, very heavy snows. And then along the coast and, within the first at least depending on where you are in the situation, but freezing levels aloft bump up significantly once you get south of the front. That's going to push northward above 6,000 and 8,000 feet through the central southern panhandle, so that'll be all rain. And then in the northwest, there could be a pocket of moderate icing there along the northwest coast from Wainwright down toward Point Hope above 3,000 feet, and then with the system, the front out ahead of it that's working its way with the low that's going to be just trucking right along the Aleutian chain. We expect central Aleutians north of there in the lower Bering, moderate icing above 6,000 feet, and then moderate icing around and above 8,000 feet from the central Aleutians southward into the North Pacific. And a quick check of the overall pattern, talking about this troughiness over the western mainland, eastern Bering, Chukchi Sea. This is a broad trough. We have upper level jet stream winds 30,000 feet to 130 knots from the southwest coming into the northern panhandle into the Yukon territory. And then on the backside of the trough, we have this little jet streak. And there's this polar low that's going to also in this mix that's going to come up. The remnants, the colder air aloft is going to move up along the west side here of the Gulf, and that could actually even bring some accumulating snow to Anchorage some point Thursday afternoon into early Friday morning, especially hillside, upper hillside. There's enough cold air aloft, there could be a little sneaky snow there. And then this is the stronger 165 knot west-northwest wind max at 30,000 feet there south of the central Aleutians. Bring it down to 700 millibars. We see broad wind field 50 to 80 knots south of the Aleutians in the North Pacific. And then here, pretty decent mid-level winds as high as 55 to 85 knots pulling in to areas of the northern panhandle on up into lower Yukon territory. And then at 3,000 feet, we find those stronger winds coming into areas of the central northern panhandle. And then behind me, a broad wind field associated with that low, kind of an elongated frontal system. So we have winds as high as 70 knots south of the eastern Aleutians on Thursday. To the north, 50, 55 knot east-southeast winds. And then south of the Aleutians, we have west-northwest winds 50 to 60 knots. And so this all translates to moderate turbulence widespread along the Aleutian chain on Thursday, surface to 3,000 feet. There could even be a few pockets of severe turbulence and even extending up into the lower portion of the Alaska Peninsula. And then as I step out of the way here, with that low coming up west of Yakutat and between there, Yakutat and Cape Suckling, we expect there could be some isolated severe turbulence just off of Gustavus in that area here in the Gulf, and also with the front swinging through and the wind shifts, there could be some low-level wind shear as well. So this area will likely see widespread moderate turbulence with perhaps some areas of isolated severe turbulence just off of the western coastline there of the Panhandle.